Great. All right. Hey, Senator Nguyen, thank you for joining me.
Hello.
Um, Hi, I really appreciate it. It's exciting to have a politician involved in this project. And for the people listening, could you take a moment just to let everyone know a little bit about you and the district you represent?
Yeah, I'm State Senator Joe Nguye from the 34th District, which is actually where I was born and raised. It is, White Center, West Seattle, Vashon Maury Island, South Seattle with Soto, South Park, parts of Georgetown, Vashon Maury Island, and obviously West Seattle as well. So it's an honor to be able to serve the community in which I grew up, and it's been even more fun being able to work on climate policies in Washington State, where we're leading the way.
Oh, it is really an honor to meet you. I'm also born and raised in this area, and it's so exciting to meet another person who cares very deeply about where they grew up and are still here working for change.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I want to start, is just something personal. If you want to touch back to perhaps your childhood or young adult years, um, as it relates to your passion for the environment, for climate, maybe if there's anything related to water specifically, but it's okay if there's not.
Yeah, there's probably two memories growing up in this area that I think really informed kind of how I operate now. One being my family are Vietnamese and they were immigrants from Vietnam, from a fishing village in Vietnam. So when they first came over to the United States, fishing was kind of an important part of our life, whether it was sustenance or just kind of part of the culture. And I remember going down to the Duwamish, right by the lower bridge, where my father was fishing, and then we put out crab pots. And I remember seeing a sign that basically said, "Don't eat the fish" or "Don't eat the crab." You still see them now, actually, down there. And that was the first time where I understood, and maybe I was 4 or 5 years old, the impact of humans on our ecosystem. Right before, it was kind of like nothing that you'd be aware of. But the fact that in this particular area, the Duwamish, you could not eat the fish or eat the shellfish because it was so dangerous and toxic, I think really stood out to me because my father, that was an important part of his life. And now you see signs in multiple languages, Vietnamese being one, because we weren't the only ones that were kind of down there experiencing it. And I think the other one actually, so growing up, I'm off 519 in Burien. A lot of my classmates in elementary school had asthma. And I never thought about it back then, but we just figured that, oh, just a lot of us kids had asthma, not realizing that living by a polluted highway contributes to the cause of asthma for young people as well. So, having those two experiences really has shaped a lot of what I do and kind of what I want to make better for our future.
Mm, thank you. Yeah, I can relate to the Duwamish. It's been a passion project. I made a project in 2017 around the Duwamish and studied very deeply the history of how the Duwamish was a tidal flat. And yeah, I'm sure you know the history, and I feel very passionate. It's what is it, like in the top 10 super funds for rivers?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think there are 12 and they're definitely in the top 10.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I understand a little bit about what you've been moving forward and related to climate. Please take the floor to talk as much as you want about the work you've been doing related to climate change, to helping the Duwamish River, anything that you would
Yeah.
like to share.
Yeah, we've funded a number of cleanups specifically in that area, but the main part is we cannot move forward in a world that is just without, clean energy and infrastructure that matches. So for us, we passed what's called the Clean Energy Transformation Act that essentially requires our utilities to be carbon free by 2050. We have what's called the Climate Commitment Act, which folks may have heard about on the ballots this past year as well, where there are really about 200 large emitting polluters in Washington state that account for about 80% of the carbon emissions and requiring them to decarbonize in our state as well. In addition to things like sustainable fuels, things in the transportation sector, having more multimodal, we really want to shape kind of the future where we're able to have a clean transition and ensuring that the people who are most impacted are also included in that process. And part of what that looks like is oftentimes you'll look at energy projects or clean energy And oftentimes it's led by developers, it's led by local politicians. This is not the case. In the CCA, there is a requirement to have an environmental justice council that works through kind of the implications of a transition. 35% of the funds raised and allocated must be towards overburdened communities, 10% specifically are to tribes. Um, Really, we're trying to create this wholesale shift around what climate change policies can look like to include communities. And then kind of going beyond that too is how do you build more clean energy through transmission lines, through siting, through permitting? How do we ensure that, as we see higher incidences of heat related or just weather related natural disasters, we can have some resilience associated with it. And then also people are impacted by now. So even adaptation is certainly a big part, especially on the Duwamish. We've been spending time and money to raise the seawall because of the king tides. You're seeing now whole communities in South Park and Georgetown be impacted by flooding, which have never been done before. So there's a whole gamut of things that are kind of in play.
Yeah. Uh, it's a lot. It's exciting. Um, was wondering if I could just slow you down a little bit around creating an environmentally just world. And if you could just say a little bit more about that, speaking to people who don't really think very much about what that means.
Yeah, I think if you look at the harms that are created in our communities, oftentimes you see certain communities be impacted more than others, right? The International Chinatown District oftentimes has been um, the subject of infrastructure imposed on them, even South Park by the Duwamish, where the highway basically cuts a neighborhood in half that used to be one neighborhood. And then when you look at the areas of the Duwamish specifically, I drive over the West Seattle Bridge like many people do, and you can just imagine how beautiful that used to be. Now it's an industrial area where it's been a dumping ground for a number of toxic chemicals, impacts our tribal nations, impacts our communities. And you see all oftentimes when we talk about climate change and the policies to mitigate it, the communities that are least likely to be engaged in that process are the ones that are most harmed. So how do we kind of flip that on its head? And I think that's what we're doing now with some of the policies that we have in place. But when we talk about, electric vehicles or charging stations, before only wealthy folks were able to have access to electric vehicles and charging stations. And now the state has funds where even low income people can potentially have a lease on a car for $75 a month, making it very affordable, right? We want to make sure that their lives are impacted positively when we have these policies get put into place. So that's kind of what we talk about when we say, how do we have a just transition? How do we have more air quality monitoring around the flight paths of the airport? So that way we can understand particulate matter and the impacts it has on communities. To then, for instance, for us, how do we, remove those? So it's a lot of it is really making sure that we're prioritizing the people who are most impacted and not just the ones that are able to attend the meetings.
Mm, that's wonderful. Well, as you know, I'm an artist, and we tend to live in an imaginary, visionary lands. And if you could speak to, regardless of what we're facing federally in the next 4 years and the impact on our states, regardless of funding, of, how many years it might take to do things, if you could envision the Duwamish, West Seattle, Burien, Georgetown. You talked about you driving over the West Seattle Bridge and how beautiful we can imagine it once was. I as well, heartache at moments thinking about many things that used to be. What would be your vision for this beautiful, just world that we're trying to work toward?
Yeah, I just see a vibrant community. It's nothing that you wouldn't see anywhere else, right? Like it's nothing that you wouldn't see in other parts of Seattle that have access to resources. For me, I want to see a thriving community of diverse people who are some of them, born and raised in the area, some of them are raising families in the area, but having access to things like parks and water and things like anybody else would in any other part of Washington State and Seattle specifically as well. I actually would see us removing infrastructure to ensure that communities are put back whole. I hope to see things like less, internal combustion vehicles driving around, less drayage trucks that are diesel, more things that are electrified. One thing that people don't realize too is when you talk about pollution, there's also noise. So some of that peace and that calm that comes from kind of climate policies to electrify vehicles, to decarbonize certain areas. I want folks to not be afraid that during the next king tide that their house is going to flood. Things like that, where it's really normal in the sense that any other neighborhood that has access to resources feel that comfort and that peace that we don't necessarily feel in the South End. That's my vision for what it can look like.
Yeah, yeah, that's beautiful. And you kind of addressed this already, but is there one specific infrastructure change? Can you say any of that? It-
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
candidly, I support the removal of the highway that cuts South Park in half. I think
Mm,
the shorter term play also is how do you electrify a lot of the diesel trucks and the drayage trucks are in that area. Um, that is kind of this ongoing fight where we certainly need to support our economic infrastructure for our ports and for the community that's down there. But we can also do it in a way that actually can be mindful of people and of also the workers that are there. So if we had, charging infrastructure for electric semi trucks and drayage trucks, I think that would actually go a long way to support our communities.
mm. Your district's so blessed to have you and that I'm so glad people voted you in. And
Thank you.
yeah, I, I mean, what can we do as Seattleites to support areas we don't live in? Is there anything as voters, can you give a little feedback on how
Yeah,
we
I
can
mean,
impact change to support you?
I'm very thankful for the voters in terms of the results of this last election. The Climate Commitment Act is the cornerstone of which we're able to do a lot of these projects. Um, in Washington State, too, I happen to be at COP29 in Baku with the United Nations. And it was actually eye-opening for me because, we do this work and we see the impacts that we have here locally, but I don't think too much about the national implications, let alone the global implications of the work that we do.
Hmm.
But when you support policies and you support candidates and people that care about climate change and believe it is real and back them as the policies move forward, you have a chance to actually make international change when it comes to climate policies. Governor Inslee, obviously, we're very lucky to have his leadership in this space.
Mm.
But Washington State and Seattle specifically has been on the forefront of climate policies and decarbonization, where I, hope that we can move faster. But even in doing what we're doing now, it seems to be very much kind of the impetus for many other jurisdictions to move forward.
Mm. Mm. Do you want to say more about the Climate Commitment Act? It's quite new, and maybe there's many people that don't know much about it.
Yeah. Yeah, the Climate Commitment Act is this landmark policy that we passed a couple of years ago, where essentially in Washington State, there's 199 what we call covered entities. These are companies, largely companies. Some of them are, say, for instance, the University of Washington, and they emit more than 25,000 million metric tons in any given year, which is a lot of pollution. So, of these 199, they account for about 80% of all the carbon emissions of Washington State. So if we were able to get these handful of organizations to decarbonize, we're basically on our way there. We're one of the few states that are kind of on track to actually meet our decarbonization goals. And one of the linchpins for this to work is that we have an auction, a carbon market, right? Where if you're a company, we benchmark how much carbon emissions you have at a certain point in time, and you have to reduce that over time as well. And we use the Paris Agreement as the math by which people had to reduce their carbon emissions. So if you're able to meet these decarbonization targets, then there's no obligation for you to pay anything. If you can't, you have to buy credits in order for you to offset. And then those obviously get limited over time. And then by 2050, they're no longer there. So there's this market mechanism that provides resources for us to then utilize those funds to actually do target decarbonization. Half of those funds roughly go to transportation, about a third go to our built environment, and the rest goes to operating costs for a variety of things. And the reason why that's the case is because that actually aligns with the carbon emissions profiles in Washington State. So it's a very thoughtful, innovative program that had buy-in from community, from tribes, from business, from labor to move us forward. And it's really been this kind of cheat code that we've had, just because nobody else has something similar. Quebec and California have had carbon policies that are in this vein. We've modeled it after them, but we've been able to refine it. And because we were able to pass this before the Infrastructure Reduction or the Inflation Reduction Act by the Biden administration, we actually teed ourselves up very well to have access to federal funds. So we have this transformative policy that's bringing in federal and local revenue to help us decarbonize, and that's why you're seeing some changes happening now.
Mm. I didn't think that's wonderful. I didn't think I'd go in this direction, but I am just going to ask, is there any concern, so our state is leading, is there any concern in the next 4 years with a different White House?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, Uh, the answer is yes. More globally, that's actually why I was in the United Nations to have some of these conversations around how subnationals can actually play in. So the one benefit that we had was because we passed this early on and because we passed this before the Biden administration, we've actually been able to benefit from a lot of the resources and policies already. And candidly, it would take us more than 2 to 4 years to fully implement the resources that we now have today. So, in my mind, yes, it's going to impact us, but hopefully not as much as we think, because we knew that the next 2 to 4 years was more going to be implementation. And certainly it would be helpful if we had a federal government that believed in climate change. We're not going to have that in the next 4 years, but we do have enough resources and also things already in place that it'll take us about that long for us to kind of get going, anyways. So hopefully in the next year and a half, um, people are going to realize the errors of this current administration, or sorry, the next administration coming in, and they'll likely lean back to something more normal, which hopefully then gets us to a point where we can actually engage again. But yes, it will impact us, but we have a lot of work to do anyway, regardless of who was in the national office. And hopefully by the time that we get more of a footing for our next steps, we'll have a sympathetic administration that believes in climate change.
Yeah, yeah. Well, sure makes me proud to be part of the state. Um, I I want to just swing in a little different direction. You talked about fishing from your childhood and just see if you have any connection to the activism around the Snake River dams
Yeah,
removal.
I
And
do.
it's a big, huge passion personally. And then it also lives inside this hour-long work that this project, See Change Within Us. And I just wonder, if you want to speak to that, because there just continues to be more stalling. And what are you seeing? What are you hoping?
Yeah, I think, when I visited the Yakima tribe to talk to them about climate policies, what they've said to me in the past was, we've seen your clean energy projects before and it did not work well for us. And if you ever go visit their tribal council, there's a giant image that they have of ancestors and tribal elders fishing in the Columbia River. And in a photo that I saw during a presentation, it had that historical photo and then it had the current day photo where the dam is now, right? So the impacts that it has on the built environment for them and the impact that it has on their culture was pretty significant. And that's why they're so thoughtful around how they approach some of these problems. Um, that is a very contentious issue. Obviously, it's 3 gigawatts of energy in a dam that we know is blocking fish. So for us to keep moving forward, we have to keep building clean energy as well. But I certainly know and have been part of the efforts to make sure that we're highlighting kind of the benefits of the dam removals for our economy and for our people, but also making sure that we're building enough clean energy to augment that as well. That's what we call firm load. So even though we don't use that 3 gigawatts all the time, it certainly is there to deploy if we need to. And we need to be able to replace that, if not build more. So I don't want that to be caught up in some of the other efforts, but we certainly are being mindful of what that could look like in our energy portfolio if that's not there. And if we weren't being mindful of it, then it might make it even trickier for us to potentially remove. But there's a concerted effort that's happening right now. Largely, it's at the federal level because those are federal dams. So when we talked about kind of how the next administration could impact us, this is one of those key projects that would be impacted by a Trump administration.
Yeah, yeah. It's it's unfortunate because it's been, people have been working on this for a couple of decades.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I know that Kathy Rogers Morris has been replaced by I forget the name of the new.
Baumgartner. I would, I mean, he's probably in the same vein as she is on that.
Right. I was hoping maybe he might be willing to work together to find solutions.
I would not bet on that, but
Okay.
we'll see. We'll see.
We'll see.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. I'm just gonna ask a couple more questions. Um, yeah, they're just some simple questions I've been asking everyone. More from the heart. How does water shape us and our city, or you could speak about our state?
Yeah. Well, look at, well, I mean, look at Seattle specifically. Our whole city is based off of water, whether it was the riverways to move timber, whether it is even, our ports, because we have access to the Strait of Juan de Fuca that allows for goods and services to come through, whether it's the Duwamish that cuts through the heart, right? Like, I think water is such an important piece of our history and our culture and our ecosystem that lives here. And even today, the fresh water that we have certainly gives us nourishment and life, and also the hydroelectricity that provides us from the dams and the waters that we have. So it's kind of this double-edged sword where water has really been the key resource that we've had in all of Washington State, and it's important for us to protect. And sadly, that's not quite where we've been historically, but that's why it's important for us to keep moving forward on it.
Yeah. And to relearn and learn from the tribes how to live in relationship with water, right?
Yeah,
We've just
yeah,
manipulated it. And part of my personal drive came from growing up on a hillside in Magnolia, where, the Indigenous had a word for that hillside, which translated something around water coming out of hillside. And all these houses were built there. And by the mid 90s, when we had more record breaking rainfall, my house was one of the houses impacted and was destroyed.
yeah,
And so clearly, these repercussions of um, the mistakes we've made and not living in relationship with the land and the water is now coming to impact everyone.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, certainly.
and my job is trying to bring more of this awareness to all people, and especially around this idea of environmental justice. Because I was just a white kid growing up in Magnolia. I may not have been very aware in the privilege that I lived in. And that certainly had a huge impact on beginning this wake up call to what was happening,
Yeah,
has been happening for hundreds of years. Um, let's see here. How have climate change and local water issues become more urgent for humans, for Northwest tribes, and for endangered species like salmon and orca these days? And I'm sort of asking this question because I did this project back in 2018, 2019. So how are things more urgent these days?
well, if you look at the number of extreme heat events, even since 2018, a lot of our climate policies were passed when extreme heat events were kind of, rare, once or twice, maybe every few years. Now you're seeing them happen probably 3 or 4 times every single year, which has this tremendous impact on our ecosystem. So everything from marine wildlife and things like that dying in droves because of the heat. We're seeing our snowpacks melt faster, which means that the water runs faster earlier. So we see flooding. And also during the summertime, we actually see less snowpack and less water. So our energy sources are constrained as well. So water has a huge impact in terms of kind of how we operate, even for the salmon and for the orcas. We know that work done to make sure that water quality that produces life for salmon is important, because then our whole food chain kind of is in play and is in harmony, which is not the case right now. Um, so the number of things that has happened even just since 2018 has been pretty drastic in terms of water quality and kind of the implications it has in our broader society. Even if you're not an environmentalist, even if you don't care about salmon or orcas, it does impact your life on a very real basis. Your electricity bills are impacted by it, right? Like your water that you drink is impacted by it. The wastewater that we see that impacts our infrastructure is part of that as well. So it's always been a pretty core component of our city and our state, and I think it continues to be even more strained going forward.
Yeah, great answer. You've touched on this already, but if there's anything more you want to say around how can Seattle residents and Washingtonians relate to nature, steward the ecology around us, and work together toward a just, sustainable future for all humans and the more than human?
Yeah, I think there's a number of ways, right? So there's very tangible ways where you can be out advocating for some of these policies or even doing some of that work to ensure that it's getting done. And there's also other ways where just voting and making sure that you're engaged in the community is going to be important as well. Um, I think what you're doing is a key component of telling the story of why this is so important. So everything from just living your daily life and ensuring that you're being engaged, I think that's one. Others are going to be around like working climate policies. That's another, right? So there's a lot of things that you can do here in Seattle, specifically in Washington State, mainly because we have kind of the appetite and the political dynamics that makes it worthwhile. So, you know, it can be as easy as voting, making sure that you vote for people who care about these spaces, but you can also be even more engaged if you want.
Hmm. Great. I appreciate you giving me a little shout out there. I have kind of a sweet story that'll give you hope. A couple years ago, we were as part of something called National Water Dance. We danced around Green Lake and raised awareness. So we had dancers and we had activists for the Snake River dams holding signs and passing out flyers. And one of our people heard a parent asking their child about it, and their child, an elementary school kid, was explaining to them the circumstances of the need for the dams to be removed to save our
Yeah.
wild salmon and help our orca.
Yeah.
So everything we can do is helpful. I just have one last question. Um, I'm not sure if a politician can answer a question this, because it seems like this sort of wokeness, this liberal stuff that's out there. Maybe it's a little too related to that, but I'm wondering if you want to speak to how can we move in new ways to overcome the colonialist narrative of the human as separate to rebuild an environmentally just world?
Candidly, obviously, it's always very difficult to kind of create change. And when you think through the implications of somebody's daily life and how they're impacted by some of these things, what I found to be very helpful, depending on kind of the group that I'm in, yeah, there are certain folks that, I could talk about climate change, environmental justice, and everything is fine. And there are other folks that might be averse to even some of those jargon and that language. And when you bring back the tangible, when you bring back the implications of their daily life, they may not consider themselves to be environmentalists. In fact, if you look at the Climate Commitment Act, there were 7 or 8 conservative counties that voted for Trump that also then voted to keep the Climate Commitment Act. People know that this impacts them on a very real basis. When they see wildfires in their communities, when they see droughts, when their energy costs go up because of our hydroelectricity dependence, when they see things like salmon and when they see things like the environment cleaning up, those things are very real and very tangible. So in my mind, you don't necessarily have to always be 100% in with kind of the crowd that does environmental justice to feel the impacts of that. And then engaging people where they come, I think it's also important as well. So for me, I've traveled around Washington State, talked to a lot of leaders in places that I suspect don't have the same political leanings as I do, but found a lot of comfort in finding people that still do care because they know how important this is. So you'd be surprised at how much you can get done by showing up and caring. And a lot of times people have not had the ability to meet with leaders in this space because of it. And that creates, this tension that can really be rectified by talking to folks, meeting with folks, and kind of being in community. So that's kind of what I would say to how we move forward.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. That really touches my heart because I have this wonderful conservative Republican voting father who I love so much, but he is truly the reason that I, as a small person, became passionate for the environment. He was out taking me on the water and teaching me to sail and showing me spider webs in September in our backyard, and I know how much he loves the environment, and there's just some kind of disconnect for us to really come together. And you speaking to really coming together in person and talking, and that's another hope I have for this project. Somehow or another, to gather us from different viewpoints to realize that we're truly interdependent and interconnected, and we need one another, and we need to work together and begin to see what we care and what we love. And
Yeah.
it really is about love.
Yeah.
That not just a sentiment, but this like regenerative movement that we bring toward one another. Is there
Yeah.
any final thing you would like to say, Senator?
No, keep it up. I think the main thing for me is the more people who understand the implications of their life in this world, and the more people who see climate policies as, necessary. I think that's important. And also telling the story of our past as well. Obviously, we've not done a good job historically on engaging communities. And I think one of the key things that we can do going forward is as we talk about climate change and clean water, clean air in this area, we're doing it in a way that I think is honoring the history of Washington State.
Yeah, exactly. The history is so important to know our history. That's part of what I'm trying to do in this project too, and the one I did a few years ago. I just want to let you know that my 23-year-old daughter, she went to Western and she dates someone who works in politics. She knew exactly who you were and immediately said, "Oh, Mom, he is so great. The work he's doing is so great." So I just
That's
want
amazing.
to let you know that.
Good. No, I'm glad that they stay engaged as well. So I hope that that's an ongoing thing.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for this interview. You've said some incredible things, and I'm really grateful that you would take the time to meet with a lowly artist.
Thank you for your work. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Have a happy holidays.